Hey everyone, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast this week. This is John, and I'm so excited this week to have back on one of our most requested guests and someone who transformed my own coaching by some one-on-one mentorship work together. Mark Bennett. Mark Bennett has spent 30 years working and supporting leaders in the sports world and the business world and elite sports teams. He has worked in British military training as a training designer, manager, coach, senior instructor. He's worked with Olympians, Paralympians, and everything. And the core of his work is that performance is a behavior, not an outcome. And we spend so much time looking at the outcomes of sport instead of what are the behaviors required to perform at the highest level. And so when Mark came on in the first year of this podcast, we brought him back on a second time the second year. And I think this is the fourth time he's been a guest here because his insight is so incredibly insightful and helpful to your coaching. So this is an episode that you're going to want to really get ready, get set, and take some notes. All right. Now, before we get started, want to first of all just let you know that we are in the process of booking our speaking for the fall of 2025 and spring of 2026. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, we don't, how will we get John into our school or our sports club or our sports governing body? While I do have a lot of stuff in the calendar, I do still have some openings as well. So please feel free to reach out, John, John, at changingthegameproject.com. Same email for any bulk book orders of the Champion Teammate or Champion Sports Parent or any of our books as well. Let's bring me to your community or bring Jerry to your community. We love doing that. Okay. Also, number two, thank you to Sprocket Sports, our incredible sponsor for the past couple of years. Sprocket Sports is the best registration system, website, team communication system, all in one, built by people who understand the youth sports ecosystem, run by people who have run sports clubs and been on board of directors and really know everything that you need to run a great organization, but also have this incredible registration and accounting system. So your back end is just as beautiful as your front end. So check them out, sprocketsports.com/CTG, or just when you talk to them, say you heard about them on the Way Champions podcast. Okay. And thanks again, finally, to our Patreon podcast champions and all of our Change the Game Project premium members who help support the production of this podcast for over 420 weeks now. So it's been a wonderful journey, and we appreciate all your support. If you want to become a premium member or a Patreon podcast champion, you can just get all the info, sign up in the show notes. You get all of our courses, all of our podcasts organized for you, all of our best blog posts in one place for parents, for coaches, and for athletes. It's just a great resource for you. Okay. But for now, get ready, get set. It's Mark Bennett from PDS Coaching. You're going to love this one. Mark, welcome back to the Way of Champions, man. It's so awesome to have you back on. I think you're still setting records. This might be the fourth time, so you might be our most common guest and well deserved and well asked for. And we were talking beforehand. I said, your influence on me as a coach, but also on our listeners from first and second season when you were on, it was huge and it was always so popular. And so I know we have listeners to this podcast who don't know who Mark Bennett is, but hopefully at the end of this time, with a couple pages of notes, go, man, I got to find out who that guy, a little more about him.
Well, thanks for having me back on, John. It's amazing that I still get emails and messages from people that say, I've just listened to your podcast with John O'Sullivan. I really took this. I've got some questions. So even those early podcasts are still stimulating thought and reflection and action, which is a great bit, right? Not just a thought, the action from the thought.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the first time I heard you speak, that was my that was my reaction as well, because I think you have a very great way of sort of putting sometimes into simple words or concepts something that we all feel as leaders and as coaches. And you've put it in a way that's like, yes, that's it right there. And maybe just tell people a little bit like your journey in doing that really started in the military and military training. So just a lot of people have no idea who you are. So maybe dive in there and how you got started in this space as a special forces soldier.
So I joined the military in 1983, thinking everyone would be highly motivated and fit. I was brought up in a small village in Cornwall, the southwest of England. So it's lots of hills. You know, we didn't have central heating. We had a well in the garden. So cold, being wet was a normal thing for me. And, you know, running, cycling to school 5 miles every day. So when I joined the army, there was a lot of unfit, demotivated soldiers around me and recruits. There was the motivated. And so when I joined, I got into a little bit of trouble. And then I met a commando, a British commando, and he took me under his wing, saw me for me, and inspired me. So then I ended up, the short version was I went down, did the commando course, passed that, then became a physical training instructor, and then went after serving in Kenya. I went as soon as I came back from Kenya, the first Gulf conflict was on, so I went straight to there with the commandos, and from there I was promoted and moved into a recruit training center where I was a physical training instructor, commando trained, you know, loved pain and log races. And for literally 10 weeks, you had new recruits that came in, and there was a group of platoons that had their own platoon sergeant, own physical training instructor. And you pretty much train them how you wanted in those days. And at the end of that 10 weeks, there was a log race, endurance tests, etc. There's about 4 different tests. And my platoon for the first year, 18 months, was winning every single test. So I thought, I'm awesome at what I do. I'm the man. And it you get the light bulbs, John. And the first light bulb for me was in those early 90s, and it was a negative one. So on one of the pass offs, a parent came up to me and said, "Oh, and he mentioned my name and said, You're the person that's really inspired my son. My son doesn't stop talking about you. You've really changed his life." And it was a negative light bulb where I looked, and when he said changed the son's life, I looked at the numbers of the people passing out after the 10 weeks. And I started to see that the numbers of the platoons, mine was smaller.
Mm,
So although I had highly motivated, mental resilient, fit people passing out, I'd also had a lot that didn't and went back to civilian life. So in that moment, I realized I wasn't very good at what I did, from thinking I was brilliant. I went a 10 out of 10 to a 2. So
mm,
in that moment, I decided I needed to change what I did or change the way I did it.
hmm
So remember, obviously, no internet. I didn't know anybody that was doing this, anything. So I just went on this journey of discovery. I started to lose some of the competitions early on, but I started to get bigger numbers passing in. And after about another 6 months, 8 months, I started to win the competitions again, and I was getting big numbers going through. So the it was great, but the challenge was I couldn't explain what I was doing. I just had figured something out, a smarter way. And then I got promoted, ended up being in the Army Physical Training Corps, which was only about 500 in the British Army, which you lead a regiment into the mental and physical robustness.
hmm
And through that journey, I started to work on my holidays and leave with elite sport.
mm,
Um, and again, my next light bulb went off where I was doing a pre-season for a professional rugby team and really changed them, connected to them. And then they went back to the normal season. Within a couple of weeks, I had some of their top players getting in contact saying, "Mark, it's all gone back to before we came to you. It's
mm,
regressed. You need to come up here and have a look." So when I came up then, that next light bulb was, okay, the problem is now people are relying on me to influence. And when I'm not there, the influencers should be, whether that's the managers, the coaches, or the senior players, or anybody, they don't know how to keep it going or grow it.
mm,
So my next light bulb was, hang on a minute, this is going to be useless if somebody is relying on me. I need to understand what I'm doing in a way where I can share that,
Hmm.
so that when someone leaves me unsupervised, they still have the knowledge and understanding to have those interventions to impact performance and behavior. So
Hmm.
it took me about another 6 years, and I started to then build what is known today as the performance development systems.
Hmm.
Since that time, John, I think I've worked with over 30 sports, um, from MBA, Major League Baseball, England Rugby, Premiership Football, Premiership Rugby, Olympic, Paralympic, and
Hmm.
also in normal domestic clubs, grassroots academies, across many sports, including golf as well.
Hmm.
And on that journey, I ended up, short version was, ended up turning down promotion in the early 2000s and just commit to this full time. So that's pretty much where it stemmed from. But if anyone that knows me, John, if you speak to anyone, I think you've had a few guests on, I am relentless and patient in pursuing my own excellence, to challenge my own principles, to build. So I've got to a point now where I've identified the elements in organizations, in corporate business and in sport, that impacts behavior at an organizational level, but
Hmm.
also impacts judgment for a coach to
Hmm.
influence an athlete. So an athlete under pressure can make their own decisions as a unit combination in itself without relying on the coach to what I
Hmm.
call rubberneck and says, what do you want me to do here, coach?
Yeah.
So part of it is, how can I get an industry manager, director of a business, or a coach or a manager influence their athletes, their staff, so when the pressure goes on, they're not relying on the coach to give them the answers. They can make good judgment, they can review, they can adapt. So
Hmm.
that's the short version, John.
Yeah, and it's a lot to digest. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, even just to go back to the beginning, the military piece, where your battalion or whatever it was, your group was winning the things, but you had the least people graduating. Um, and this is a problem. I mean, this is a military problem. This was an issue with the Navy SEALs as well, is we don't get enough people through the program, but we can't lower our standards, right? We need the same high standards, but we need to start giving people the tools beyond just the ability to endure pain or physical punishment or, physical tasks, but the mental tools and the social emotional tools to get through the hard time, and also sort of the team cohesion and togetherness. Because when you talk to a Navy SEAL, and I imagine you would agree with this, it's like, what is the quality is like being a great teammate. Having someone's back is the best quality, not the fastest or the strongest or whatever. So maybe just talk about that, because this isn't about lowering standards. This is about keeping high standards and giving people more tools to reach those high standards, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think if the simple way I now explain it is the understanding the difference between software of a human being and hardware of a human
Hmm.
being. So the hardware of a human being, whether you put that it's in business, in sport, or in the military, is your physical capacity, so strength, speed, endurance, and your skill, whether that's an individual skill as a soldier, being able to fire his weapon, pack his Bergen, read a map, or a baseball player, a basketball player, of them understanding their technical of what they do at individual, but their tactical of their game IQ, that element on that hardware. The software, low, is the glue that holds that all together. So that's being aware of your state, being able to manage your state, being able to scan, collate data in any moment, being able to then understand the options that are available, but also understand the influences that impact the choice you make, and being able to commit to a choice without fear. And then live, not stopping live, being able to review the choice, the execution, the commitment, but also be able to adapt that for your capability combination. So the people around you understanding, right, when that person's fresh, they're capable of this, but right now they're not fresh. They're even had a poor umpire call, a ref call, or their heads are down, or they're fatigued. Well, two things need to happen now. Is one, in my software, I need to understand the choice I might make, I need to change now because they don't have the capacity to be successful, whether that's a pass to them or in a business. But also then, how can I influence that person to allow them to be more effective, to maximize their capability now? So the how of communication and also my judgment of actually adapting based on the live capability that's changing. That software element will trump hardware every day of the week. So when you
Hmm.
look at Navy SEALs, SBS, SAS, or high performance teams at the elite level, not that say it, that live it, what they're very good at is understanding themselves, being able to self-regulate themselves, but also understand others in the capability of the moment, but also make judgment live based on what the success is and the right choice now to impact success based on the capability around us.
Yeah. And it's I like that hardware versus software because so often we focus on the hardware
Mm.
and just assume the software will figure it out, or sort of have this fixed mindset of like, oh, well, they just don't have what it takes, as if what you're labeling software are not skills that can be developed, right? And that's the important thing, is that these things are all skills, or as you would, maybe you might use the word, these are behaviors, and a behavior is a choice, and we might have natural tendencies of how we react in moments, but we also can be trained to not react but respond.
Yes, and that key point about the challenge coaches, managers have is often on training courses, we don't formally teach how to develop software, not just in others, but in ourselves. If we are the influencer, we've seen, I'm sure you've seen it hundreds of times, John, if not thousands, that on the sideline, the coach is losing their head. And when the coach is losing their head and their state, now they're not making good judgment. And
Mhm.
if they're the tactical principle of who's going on, who's going off the big picture, now their judgment's being negatively influenced by their own state. But then we see now that ripples through a team. So when we're looking at influencers now, we're saying, well, are we asking too much of a coach? It's always saying is a lot of top coaches and managers have gone through because they were great athletes or they did well at a certain department, but now they're moved and been promoted. It's a different skill set. And
Mhm.
are we upskilling them to say, look, I know your intention is to get the best out of this team, but at the moment you're struggling because if a tactic goes wrong, your go to is we need to repetition that tactic in practice more, as
Mhm.
opposed to saying, well, hang on a minute, in this moment now, can I identify the source of why that's not working and have interventions in there live, but also then in practice? And that other point, John, about engaging every single athlete, the amount of times we have teams where a coach will ask a question if they do, and they'll always go to the same three or four athletes because they'll get
Mhm.
the answer they want to hear. But
Mhm.
actually, quite happily for a whole season, this player stood on the back. But actually, that's a player that might need to make a decision in a match. But at no point have you engaged with that to identify what are you thinking, athlete? Okay, now I understand this is where your source of the breakdown is. I can put an intervention in there to upskill you in that software element so you can expend and maximize your hardware. So this is where we see a lot of people say, oh, he's got so much potential, she's got so much potential. We're saying, well, how are you measuring potential? If you're
Yeah.
saying they can pass a ball, they can dribble, they're fast, then you're saying, okay, no, that's not potential. They have attributes that under certain conditions they can execute, but on other conditions they cannot.
Mhm.
Well, do you spot where the source of that issue is? Do you know how to maximize that to enhance it? So now you have a collective strength of an athlete, not just, oh, that I just can't get the best out of them. They're just not clicking with the team. And,
Mhm.
and I think that's where I think there's a lot of coaches and managers that feel a bit lost and lonely because no one's providing them with those solutions or support so
Mhm.
they can impact those people to get the best out of them. And it all
Yeah.
stems from self. That's the
Yeah.
key point.
Yeah. And as you sort of give this overview, before this podcast, I was just trying to think about the different parts of my own coaching that, if I was standing above it and back and watching me coach, were really influenced heavily by our conversations together, whether on this podcast or I filmed some sessions and you analyzed them for me, and things like that. And that was great. But so many little tweaks or things, I see your influence, and that piece right there, is a huge one. With right when, like, okay, now we blow the whistle in practice and we break off, and instead of the coach jumping in right away, can the players assess what's happening, right? But then I don't want to hear from the same player every time. So I want to either, call on, hey, Johnny, you're going to give the assessment, and that's not comfortable for Johnny, but now he has to. Um, or, I started using that as well with, the injured players who are on the sideline. And I'm like, you're the coach now. So you go out to your group and you're involved while they're playing and whatever, and you're going to do your best to fix it and you're going to report back so that you're engaged in this practice and not just sitting here on the sideline shivering thinking about your girlfriend or whatever. And so I think that's a really big part of the ownership. And what I've noticed is players who have played for me and have gotten a lot of reps of that, they go on to other coaches, and sometimes those other coaches are upset that these players are actually thinking about and coming up with solutions because they don't feel like that's their job, but and they're like, wow, that kid is really smart. It's like, yeah, that's not an accident.
Yeah.
That needed to be pulled out of them.
And there's a few elements in that, John. I mean, one is as a coach, we need to be, and I have to do this when I have interventions with big organizations or teams or individual coaches, managers, is identify what they believe is their role. What is an effective coach? What is an effective manager? Because if they're somebody that says, well, I'm like the chess master, I oversee the game and, it's me against the other coach and I can come up with the tactics and I can tell the players where to go. So, okay, so you're a reactive coach then. And they're
Mhm.
saying, what do you mean reactive? They said, well, the game's live. So you can't stop the game and then go, hang on a minute. There's a few timeouts in some sports, but most of the time it's too late. So if
Yeah.
then you're having a timeout and you're saying, right, you stand here, you go here, draw some funny pictures on a board. Well, guess what? The other coach is doing the same thing. So they go out and it might be out of date in half a second.
Yeah.
So the only way you're going to be effective is to understand, well, actually, there is still that there. There'll be things that the team won't see that I'll see a trend and I can share that. However, if I can get every athlete to understand their role on and off the ball, in and out of possession, and how they can view things and give them those permissions and confidence, you can make these choices without me. But actually, I want you to qualify, quantify why you made the choice in the execution, and we're going to build that in practice. Then, if we don't do that, you're going to have teams that are reliant on the coach. And if you're reliant on the coach, you're an out of date reactive team that
Mhm.
will always get caught out by the opposition. And I think this is where sports progressed, and indeed business, Formula One as an example, those motorsports, is we need everyone to understand I have confidence in my role, but also I know what to do live in the moment. And I have clarity. Look, I'm not allowed to make these decisions, but I'm 100% allowed to make decisions. And I'm all over these decisions. I can make them live because I know what to do in these moments. And I don't have the fear of thinking, oh, should I do this? Because if I do it, will coach be happy? Is they've got the confidence. The coach hasn't just said it when they're feeling good. They follow it through when the coach is not in a good mood. So this is that point about practice, John, because I've heard a lot of coaches that say, well, Mark, I tried this thing that you said about just asking a quiet player and they just looked at me blank. I
Mhm.
said, okay, so that's the same as me saying a person can't dribble a ball with his left hand
Mhm.
and you've given them one go to do it for 5 minutes and you dismiss it, would that be enough? And they'd say, well, obviously not. No, it needs time, Mark. That's a skill. So,
Yeah.
okay, so one is, are you getting the athletes to see the value in everyone understanding their role?
Mhm.
Secondly, are you giving them the skills to be able to make that reflect and share it with you in an effective way quickly? And are you giving them the time to enhance that skill in practice with a level of volume and repetition so they become confident and competent in it? And those are the elements where a lot of coaches fall down. So it's easy for them. I'm just going to go back to that player that always gives me the answer. But the problem is they may be in mid court or midfield, but actually the person that's making that judgment live in a match might be in defense or might be in attack. Well, you've never spoken to them in
Mhm.
every practice for the whole season. So
Mhm.
how do you know what's going on in their head so you can help them understand better and make better choices?
Well, this is also in teaching, they would call this check for understanding. How do you even know that they've learned if you never ask them, if you never give them that opportunity? And now as a coach, you can make different interventions, right? If I know I have a quiet kid who's never going to be the one to speak up, I could say before the 4 minute section of practice, hey, Mark, at the end of this, I'm going to call on you. So I really want you to think about this in this moment, right? Like that's okay, right? That's a great way to get that player started versus, because maybe A, they haven't thought about it, or B, they have, but they don't know quite how to articulate what they're thinking, which happens with lots of kids, right? And adults, right? And but if they have some time to go to process it and know, okay, I have to come up with a solution here and do it. And again, these are just reps. So your example of dribbling with your left hand, of course you can't do it the first time. But if the first time is, you know, in a playoff game with 15 seconds left and they've had no reps all along, and then you're hoping that they do it versus, no, I've trained them to be ready for this moment. I mean, Phil Jackson, the basketball coach, told us on here, he's like, one of his big things during the regular season is when games were getting out of hand, he wouldn't call timeout. He wanted them to solve it. And his reasoning was, what happens in the playoffs if there's a minute left and it's not going well and we have no timeouts? Well, they have to be able to solve it. So let's get them ready now in this 82 game season so that come playoffs, if I have a timeout, maybe I can solve it. But if not, they're like, oh, yeah, we never call timeout.
And that's a switch mentality, John,
Yeah.
with great coaches across the decades, long before potentially you and I were born, is they get excited and they seek opportunities in practice when things don't go well, which
Hmm.
is opposite to many coaches where they think, I want practice to go well.
To
I've
be
wrote down on
perfect.
my
Yeah.
session plan, this is what we need to cover. And I'm going to do everything I can, even shouting, telling them where to stand, what to do until I see it. And that's success. Whereas good coaches will say, okay, there will be times when we share a principle of play. But then what I'm going to do, I'm going to put opposition and situations in that we haven't just spoke about. We might have spoke about a week ago, so it's not fresh in questioning. And I'm going to see when things don't go well, how you can adjust. And guess what? We're going to do this a lot. And I'm going to stretch and move the pressure load in order for us to go, okay, now this is where I'm going to learn and get excited, but also engage with the players and the athletes. Say, look, we need to seek opportunities where there's struggle. So if everything's going through smooth in practice, two things: we're even so fantastic compared with everyone else in the league, then we're in the wrong league. Or
Hmm.
more like, the reality is our practice isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So now we need to go back to that Russian general years ago, that train hard, fight easy principle. What does that mean look like? But that's that point again, John, is we need to share with the athlete to get them to buy into the why and not think they should know this and then put struggle in front of them. And going back to your other point, John, about those quiet players and those interventions, the one you mentioned is a great intervention. There's another one. There's so many of these where we can enhance coaching skills. You can have an athlete and you pull them to the side while the play's on, saying, right, what are you seeing here? What are you seeing over there? And talk them through a language, a principle, which I call the action review process, where they, while they're with you and just looking at the play, they can identify the solutions or whatever may happen, the options. And then you say, great, next time out, I'd like you to share that with the group because you're spot on there. So
Yeah.
now when they go into the group and share, they know what they're saying is right and they've had space to do it. And now they're speaking of the group. You can use whiteboards, the little A3 ones, where you split them into micro groups and go, right, you've got 30 seconds. Go into your groups, come up with what you've identified based on our success, and then come in. Then you nominate. So now
Mhm.
we can't have the same. And if you've got dominant players, you pull them to the side and say, right, your success in this next 2 weeks is to the quiet ones. I want you to get in those groups. I want you to ask them what they think and get them involved. Can you do that for me? Because that's
Mhm.
going to enhance our team. So there's all this light and shade, and there's so many more where we're saying, look, if we want someone to change their behavior, we need to place an environment in place and give them the competencies to enhance that desired behavior. And then we can build the pressure on. Then it becomes natural. And this is that point, my old saying for the business was performance is a behavior, not an outcome.
Mhm.
We start targeting what are the behaviors we require to be successful, where there's a breakdown of the behaviors as a group or an individual, and then say, right, now, if that's the source, how am I going to put in interventions in practice to build and give it the time it needs to enhance those areas I've now identified are the behaviors that are inhibiting our performance?
Yeah. And it's such a powerful concept. Um, and the pushback is, oh, well, I coach 9-year-olds. This doesn't work. And you have videos that I've seen you share before of 8-year-olds, maybe even younger. I don't know, but really young kids stepping in, knowing what the solution is, coming up with that. Or kids, sort of the other concept of, what is, I forget your exact wording, but, what is unacceptable, what is acceptable, and what is exceptional. I think that's what you use,
Yeah,
right? How
yeah,
how would this drill, this activity look if it was exceptional? What is just acceptable and what's unacceptable? Kids know that, right? And so you give them that ownership. We so underestimate what children are capable of in sport that we then, because of that poor excuse, make it all about us as the coach. Yet when you step back and start demanding of them that they have to know, they do know. And it's going to be awkward because you know what? Their teachers don't let them do it, and their other coaches don't let them do it, right? And maybe in a lot of cases their parents don't let them do it. So you're the first one who's ever said, "I know you got it in you, and I know you know what's going on here. How about you share your idea?"
yeah. And that case, I've got videos I've shared on social media of 5, 6 year olds
Yeah, okay, yeah.
effectively interacting. And once they get into 9 and 10, it's natural for them. It doesn't take long. But you're right. People are not so much a product of the environment; they're a product of their interpretation of the environment.
Hmm.
So if we can get them to say, look, this is the same environment, but actually let's interpret that differently now. I know you're making opinions. A child, as soon as they start crawling, are making opinions on the food they like, the color they like, the games they like and dislike. So there's exploration of figuring things out, how to climb up on a sofa and not hit your head, whatever it may be, from young. So often what we do in sport and education, we try and structure it in such a way we say, I have knowledge, you don't have knowledge, so I'm going to share my knowledge with you. And this is nice and clean. This is, so if you don't know, I can tell you the answer, as opposed to saying, well, hang on a minute, if I'm doing the begin with the end in mind, I want you to, one, be engaged, because I want you to say in the sport, if you're young kids, I want you to enjoy it. Okay, so what's enjoyment? Enjoyment is you're interacting, you're engaged, there's some challenges for you to solve, but it's at your stretch point. So it's capable, you're capable of doing it. And how can I integrate that then into my practices to flow into matches at any age? So then when we get 5, 6 year olds have been exposed to this, by the time they're getting 12, 13, two things I believe have happened. They're staying in the sport longer because they're not being bored listening to coach talk and the same people are always being picked. But also they're at a point now where actually they're more effective under pressure. They're more effective in matches because the natural progression from what we're doing in practice to the match is closed. As you were calling with a famous basketball coach, they're smart enough to know, whoa, whoa, whoa. If I'm building you to the playoffs, or I'm building over 2, 3 years, 2, 3 seasons, because that great coaches do that. They don't, that cycle of building a team. I'm saying in this moment now, what is the right thing to do that's going to enhance my team? So I've got two options. I could just give them the answer and rotate. What are they going to get from that? Well, they might score a few more points in this moment, but they're not going to enhance in any way. Or what can I do to give them permission to start figuring these things out? Okay, well, I'm choosing this one. So long as I've explained to them why I'm doing it and don't make them fall on their face. I'm there, but I'm not just going to keep picking them up and guiding them.
Yeah.
And that for me is that craft of coaching that a lot of coaches that were great players that are fast tracked into big jobs and even in management promoted, they're not exposed to, they're not given the support they need to understand, well, how do I fit this into how I'm coaching, Mark? I have pressure to win. I have pressure from sponsors or from my, university, college. And if I don't win, they're going to fire me.
Right. And I don't have a 2-year window. I have a six
Yeah.
week window, maybe.
Yes, yeah. And that's when that's where the skill comes in and say, well, look, there's so much you can enhance. You can keep enhancing yourself for the next 10 years, but there's elements you can put in right now and you're going to have an impact straight away. And let's start sharing those with you. But remember, you need to be explicit with the athletes of why you're doing what you're doing. So they
Hmm.
see the value of the why. And a lot of the challenges is the coaches try and sneak it in and they dip in and out of it. And then when the pressure comes on, they go to is, well, I'm just going to tell you where to stand.
Hmm.
But actually, that's the worst. If you want to enhance someone very quickly, You need to prepare them for reality, which is a match. Well, what can I do in practice that's going to prepare them for that match?
Yeah.
And it won't be listening to coach from a noisy stadium where they can't hear me anyway and hoping if I shout loud enough, something's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. And I think that's the pushback would be like, hey, in the top level of sport, and maybe take North America out of that because we don't have promotion relegation in our sports. So it's not going to cost your club $100 million and whatever. But this ability to layer this in and be like, listen, like you said, the why. There's 70,000 fans. You can't really hear me. I'm not going to be able to adjust too much. So we're going to start letting you guys figure this out and be thinking players. And that, I think that autonomy and ownership, I mean, that grows confidence. Coach believes in me because he or she, feels like I got this under control no matter what's happening around me. And then I think also, right, we have such a strong outcome bias in sport, right? We can do everything right and still lose in soccer or football or ice hockey or something like that. Um, we can do everything right, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and we have to be able to assess, hey, did I do all these things? Did we prepare in training? Did we do the right things in the game so that we gave them the best chance and the ball hit the post instead of going in, or referee made a bad call for a penalty or whatever it is. And but there's so much focus on that outcome. I always think about, like, the reporters writing the game match about, the disaster of Manchester United, and then they score 2 goals in injury time and win. How does that change the article they just wrote,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, the resilience, the fight versus disaster, get rid of the coach, the players aren't bought in.
And often you can underperform and you win easily, and then
Yeah.
everyone's coming home happy. And this is that point about no. We've got to understand what are our performance markers at self and as an individual, and within my teammates, and even if I'm on the sideline, what is my success markers as a coach? My judgment, the interventions I made, how effective were they, and I can score that irrelevant of the scoreline, and that gives me a real effective data, so I understand, well, we're on the right path now. And as you say, I mean, recency bias is a huge issue within athletes and with coaches and in the people that sit, behind a desk at the TV and saying, how everything's going. And there's lots of interventions to do, particularly with the performance teams. And one of those is after match, every athlete and every coach shares a voice message in a group, and they
Hmm.
reflect on themselves first, their state, the choices, execution, and then their teammates.
Hmm.
And the teams, once we build the culture, they can also review coach as well. We don't normally start with that because there'll be dishonesty in, I can't say anything about coach, I don't want to get picked next week. But once a culture's built, we add that.
Yeah.
But what happens there is often when they perform really well in the first, say, 75% of the match or 80%, and then they lose because of something that happened in the last 5, 10 minutes, they're down on themselves. And often when they're performing quite poorly, but they score and win, all of a sudden everything's great. So there's a journey to go through to get athletes to understand, look, it's the outcome, everyone wants to win. That's there. But what we can measure and what we can control is our choices and our execution of those choices in every single moment, whether you're a
Hmm.
coach, a manager, an athlete. Now, when we start looking at that and breaking it down, that gives us some good info to know what we're doing well, we want to repeat, and where our breakdown is and where I want to improve. So then we can get athletes come in to coach and go, coach, in this session, can you put a harder attacker on me in defense? Because I need a bit more challenge on my left wing, because that's an area I want to get better at. Can you do
Hmm.
that for me, coach? I
Hmm.
need more pressure load. Now, once an athlete's saying that to you, you're now in a good place as a coach because you're thinking
Yeah.
you are taking responsibility for your own growth, but you're quantifying it. So not only will that help you, that may help the attacker as well, because you go, right, I've got a defender now that wants a hard attacker on them. Well, this is going to be great for the attacker. And that's that point going back to when you first started that part of the conversation, John, is what we need to do. And I think that's where PDS has been so successful over the decades is I I can give coaches the tools and managers to share frameworks of language to help athletes understand athletes, but
Hmm.
also to help them express a reflection of what just happened. So they're
Hmm.
not diving in the dark. What does coach want to hear? There's a process of thought. And that also helps with the coach when even coaches are speaking to coaches or managers were saying something's happened really great or really bad in outcome. But instead of me going in and just ripping people's heads off, I'm now going, well, I need to be inquisitive. I need to understand what they're thinking before I share my thoughts. And now I'm not getting honesty back. So can we structure a way of thought where people are sharing honesty, but they're sharing it in a structure where they're sharing the data so, so I can understand how they're seeing the world, how
Hmm.
they're seeing that situation. And from that, we can still agree or disagree. But from that, I'm now in a better position and make informed choices to help grow the team.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. So I want to explore sort of two other areas that were really impactful for me. And I just touched on one of them. And when you and I were working together, I was coaching my daughter's team and they were 12, 13, 14 years old, right? So this is going back 6 years, 7 years. And it was this idea of just talking to them about define what acceptable and unacceptable and exceptional look like in this thing, because I was working with a group of girls that were not super motivated, were not very competitive, had not had any success, and I had to change that attitude. And the old me would have yelled and screamed at them and tried to beat it into them, and working with you and having, quite a few more years under my belt, it was like, I got to draw that out of them. I want them to define what good looks like in this moment. And then if it's not meeting the standard that they set for themselves, now I intervene or whatever. So maybe talk about that, and then we can talk about the rule of three as well. Or maybe you feel the need to talk about that first.
So yes, so the tools, and you've shared a few of them there, is the whole aim of those tools is to eliminate grey. So the grey is where the confusion, the disengagement, and the negative performance hitters are, whether that's in business at all levels of sport, grassroots to elite. Is the eliminating the grey is having clarity on what success is. So an example would be in a practice session. This next 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or the whole session, this is what success is for this phase. This is what it looks like. So we challenge them to why are we working on this? What impact is this going to give us in a match? So now they have to tell us. We're not telling them, they need to tell us. So it's real. Okay, now we're agreeing that. Let's agree based on our present capability. Present capability meaning what we can are capable of doing now. Let's agree what would be acceptable based on we are capable of doing this. If we commit with what we have in our skills, we can execute this at this level. What would be acceptable? Unacceptable is we are capable of executing this, but we're choosing not to, whether it's in our commitment, our attitude, our communication, whatever it is. But we are now unacceptable based on our capabilities. We're choosing not to do these things to the level we're capable of. Exceptional is we want to stretch to this. So even if we nail everything and we play to our best, we might now and again reach this, but we shouldn't be reaching it all the time, because we're reaching it all the time. That should be our acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just words then. And sometimes this is where initially some athletes struggle a little bit. We say, okay, well, can you show me? So do you know what unacceptable is? Oh yeah, that 100% we can tell you that. I said, okay, so what are we capable of now?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, show me that. 30 seconds, can you show me what that looks like so everyone understands? So that's what, once we agree it, and this is where I use the little whiteboards or a bigger board. So okay, let's write this down. So we're pre-agreeing these things before. It's not a reactive after.
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, right, every time we're coming in for a timeout now, I want you to review against that.
Mm-hmm.
So don't talk about the whole game. Don't talk about everything. Let's review against this and how are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
So once we've agreed that, this is where it's so important for coaches as well, is we've got to honor that now. Because
Yeah.
the worst thing you can do is we've done all this work, then I go into the match, and now we're picking up 9 or 10 coaching points, and
Yeah.
we start sharing them, and
Yeah.
now all of a sudden the credibility is gone of no, no, no.
Yeah.
Data, people sharing data, there isn't much data an athlete or a coach or a human being can take in. So how
Hmm.
can we simplify the message, simplify the focus to build success, but still have a challenge there, so they
Hmm.
have to work at it. So then when they come in and review, what we're looking at then is, okay, so remind me what you said success was. It's this. How are we doing against what we pre-agreed? And
Hmm.
what we're looking for is them to also recognize the exceptional, not just look at problems. Where there are times and not just generalize, which we don't want. Often we get people we generalize on the good stuff and then we micromanage on the unacceptable stuff. We're saying, no, no, no. Were we exceptional any time? Well, yes. Okay. Where? Who? Put a name on it. Tell me what it is. Describe it. So now they're having to connect specifics. Okay. Acceptable. Yeah. Any unacceptables? Now, here's a big one for the listeners, John, is what can often happen is you will get some athletes at all ages, at all levels, where they will come in and they will tell you everything 100% correct. We were unacceptable there. We didn't do this because of this and what we should have done with that. And you're listening. Now, some coaches will go, this is brilliant. This athlete really knows. But that's not what we should be thinking.
Hmm.
What we need to do is say, if we're getting that information that's correct, but there was no change in the practice, but they're telling us what they should have changed and what was
Hmm.
wrong, we need to ask them, when did you recognize that? And they
Hmm.
go, oh, right away, coach. Says, okay, so what did you do about changing it? What prevented you from committing to the change? Because I don't want you to tell me the answer. I want you to show me the answer. So explain to me what prevented you from committing to the change you've now recognized and told me. And you're absolutely right in what you've said, but I'm interested in what prevented you. And
Hmm.
I'm not interested in catching you out now. I'm interested because I'm really inquisitive to understand, because that's what I want you to do. Even if it doesn't come off, if you recognize you need a change, commit to the change. And we can celebrate that because we can learn from it. What we can't learn from is you recognize you need to change something, you don't change it, but then you tell me at the end, we're learning nothing from that.
Yeah.
So get into that conversation. And if they say, well, we're not sure if you're letting us coach, which is a common element, or I'm not sure of what to say to that player because we haven't agreed the language. Those you're finding a source. Once you get to the source, you clarify the source. So it may be, no, I'm giving you permission. You can make those calls. Who do you think can make them? And you may say, right, you can, or everyone can. If it's a language element, which is often, we say, okay, well, let's agree now what to say. So if you're saying it and you hear it, what's your action if you hear this? Okay, let's agree that now. Okay, now let's go out again.
Hmm.
So this is that point about identifying the source. We've eliminated the grey, so we have a point of reference. But now we're identifying if the source of unacceptable comes in. We're getting them to spot where's the barriers. Okay, now we've cleaned that up. Let's go out again. Not changing the success criteria. Let's go out again. If they're being a bit grey on the exceptional, we go, no,
Hmm.
no, no. Specifically, what did you do there that made that so effective? What was different that gave us the success? Because we want to understand that, because we want to repeat that. So
Hmm.
let's delve into that. So
Hmm.
all of a sudden now there's quality of dialogue, and we can do
Hmm.
this in video reviews post match with elite teams as well, or anybody that's using it. So what we're doing is we're saying, look, the UAEs is a reference of clarity.
Hmm.
So when we get a bit stressed and we get caught up in outcome again and go, hang on, remind me what we agreed. Okay,
Hmm.
review against that. It
Hmm.
also helps a coach not start sharing 100 things. Look, this, if we can build in this is brilliant for us. So
Right.
give it the time it needs. So in essence, John, that is the reason for pre-agreeing UEs and getting the athletes involved. Now, if they're committing 100%, and this can often happen early on, and they're continually being unacceptable, but you can see the behaviors of commitments there. You may bring them in and say, okay, so what's preventing us from nailing the acceptable that we pre-agreed? And they said, well, we're not good enough to. We're not as good as we thought.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Fine, brilliant. We've identified that. So is there an area of source that where the breakdown is? Can we spot that? A coach may have, but you're seeing if they have, and if they can't, or said, well, actually, can I share with you? This is what I'm seeing. Great. So two things now. We can reset this, our UAEs now, to what we're capable of, but let's put some energy now into that breakdown point. So is that a grey? Is there a lack of clarity, or is it just we need to put some time and energy into this? So now again, we have a solution, and we're solution based, not problem based.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I mean I love so many things that you said there, going back to sort of the beginning is this. when players come off and tell you everything that was wrong, it's very nice. Oh, wow, wow, they know, they're really thinking. But the idea is, no, well then why didn't you, when did you realize that and why didn't you fix it?
Yeah.
Right? And have I created an environment that allows them to fix it, right? Or teaches them how to fix it? And that's really kind of where the rule of three comes in, right? That right, first I fix myself, and then my teammates fix it, and then and only then the coach intervenes. Did I explain that correctly after all these years?
Yes,
Yeah.
in a simple way, John, you're right there. So one is you pursuing your own excellence. So one is itself. This is you, that process of managing your own state, scanning well, collating the data, committing to the best choice in the moment, communicating what you need to in all itself. Rule of two is I'm having an effective impact on my peers. So
Hmm.
I'm reaching out to have an effective impact, which is very different than reaching out and telling them what they did wrong. So
Right.
what we're saying now is this is that point of effective communication in the PDS way of language is
Hmm.
effective communication has nothing to do with what you're saying, how you're saying it, how loud it is. Effective communication is only effective if it has the desired impact.
Right.
So this is now, if we can get our athletes to understand that. So we're saying now is, hang on a minute, I'm doing my job. I'm seeing someone is not staying out in the wing or going early, whatever it may be. I'm telling them to, but they're still going early. Well, that's not effective communication. So
Hmm.
what we've got to identify is, okay, so what's preventing that person? This is that layering in practice. So it may be we haven't agreed a language. I don't know. When you say that, I haven't got a clue what you mean, or I disagree, or I still don't know when the timing is. You're saying go early, but if I go early, I'm leaving a gap at the back, so I'm not sure. I'm
Hmm.
sat in the middle now. So this
Hmm.
is where either lead players can come in and go, coach, 30-second timeout, please, and they
Hmm.
can review that. Or it may be, coach, we're disagreeing here, or well, I'm not sure. So coach can then do a hot one-to-one with that player that's a bit sitting in the middle, so it doesn't have to stop play, or it's a group learning, so we're eliminating the grey. But the other element to this, that rule of two, is what we call the three A's. Now, there's a lot of feedback I get that this is a bit of a game changer for one of the challenges at all ages in teams and even in business is the peer-to-peer accepting feedback from peers. You
Yeah.
know, I'll accept it for you, I like you, or you're a senior player, but I'm not going to take anything from you. So in teams, when actually, no, this person needs to share information with you, you need to action on, we need to break this ego down. We need to be clear. So the three A's is if someone reaches out to you, yes, we want them to be effective in how they're communicating. However, we need to build a mental resilience in you to say, even if you're hearing it in a way you don't like, is the information they're giving you solution based, not complaining based? If it is, you need to internally accept it, acknowledge it by words or a thumb up, whatever it may be, and then act on it, the commitment. So if you're doing that, now we have an effective team. So this is where the UAEs come in as well, John, because what we found in even professional teams is they haven't put a structure around that effective communication. So within the three A's, what we need to say is let's agree what unacceptable would be. So I'm now spotting someone's again going too early. Let's stick with that one. So I'm
Hmm.
telling them stuff, but I'm saying you're going too early. Now, that is sharing a problem, not sharing a solution. So that would be in the unacceptable or, oh, you're wrong again, or whatever it be. It's you're sharing a problem. They know there's a problem. That's not
Hmm.
helpful.
Hmm.
So acceptable would be I'm not adjusting my style of communication or understanding it, this works better with this player when they're stressed. But what I'm sharing is solution based. So that may be an example, maybe, and I'm just making this up for sports, as it may be, right? Just hold back another half a second, or
Hmm.
when you see them come off a line, just that's when you go. So
Hmm.
what I'm sharing there is a specific solution where they can act on that. So
Right.
that would be acceptable. Exceptional would be I understand Sarah or Jimmy. I know when you're stressed, this is how I speak to you, which may be really direct. I need eye contact from you. I'm saying it like this, or it may be, hey, whisper in your ear, come around here, or I may just go, hey, remind me what we said on this. Because I know for you, you know it, but for you, that's what you giving me the solution and telling me that's going to be more helpful to you. That would be exceptional. But the important point is, even if someone sounds like their tone is aggressive, whatever, they're stressed, but the fact they're reaching out to you to help you be successful and they're
Hmm.
sharing a solution, grab that all day,
Hmm.
embrace that, because
Yeah.
that's an effective team. But
Yeah.
unacceptable is just sharing a vent or a problem.
Right. And this is what we have a lot. We have kids because we don't teach them. So it's just, after your player goes around you, Mark, cover your man. Well, thanks. Pretty
Yeah.
obvious that that's not working, right? So give me something helpful like, you know, hey, Mark, he's left-footed. Push him to his right foot,
Yeah.
right? That's helpful to me,
Yeah.
right? And I think, in these moments, these kind of things, if I take this back to practice as well, where we're getting reps, we're practicing, the center back's communication to the right back in this, did you step, did you not? But also that opportunity as the coach or that center back to go, hey, Mark, I'm curious what you're seeing out there,
Yeah.
which is preventing you from
Yeah.
stepping to that. Because Mark might see something like, well, if I step and I can't get there, they're going to play behind me and I'm out of the play. So I'm not quite sure I should step there. Great. Now I understand what Mark's seeing. I understand what the center back's seeing. And now maybe as a coach or them, they can come up with a solution there of what's happening. And that kind of thing is great. And I think the struggle that I see with teams that I work with is around this so often that you agree by being on the field with me that you're going to accept my communication in the moment, even when it's poor. And we can figure out later on how it can be better, and I can teach you how it can be better. But in the moment when you say, you know, mark number 12, I got to get on number 12.
Yeah, and that's I think this is an element, and I've seen too often, even at elite sport, where we think when athletes get to a certain level, they're effective in communication. Well, often they're not because it's never been trained. It's never been a success criteria on a session plan. And effective communication, I mean, how many times in these type teams have you asked even a senior coach of a pro team is okay, so where's your breakdown? Just our comms, when our heads are going down, our stressed, our comms drop, and then everything goes flat. So even at that level, the communication is the impact in the team's effectiveness of that interdependency. So
Yeah.
if we're identifying it, what we need to do is go, okay, let's put success on it. Because if we can improve in this, what will this give us? And ask the athletes that, oh, this will be a game changer. Okay, so what are the things we know we need to be better at? And that's where that 3A's and the UAEs around that come in. But also then it's understanding now, if we need to be solution based, is do you know the solution? Because if we don't, then that's something we can work on. So back to when we started this conversation, John, is if we're not developing the match IQ of our athletes through the process we've been talking about and much more, is they're reliant on the coach now to give them the match IQ in the moment. Now,
Hmm.
some may naturally learn because athletes do, but some now be so reliant on the coach to give them the answer of the problem solution that actually they won't be doing themselves, or they're fearful, I'm not going to do anything here in case it's not what coach wants. So now we're developing the opposite of the type team we want to develop based on we're not putting the investment in the software in a way that's going to enhance them so their mental resilience under stress is effective in not just themselves, but how they're communicating to others, but also how they're acting on the information being given to them by their peers.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's so, I mean, we would all say, raise your hand if you're a coach and you don't want your players to have game intelligence. No one's going to raise their hand. Raise your hand if you don't want your players to be effective communicators, not just loud, but effective, know how to give good information at the right time. Raise your hand. Of course, no one wants that, right? Raise your hand if you don't want your players to be creative problem solvers. No one's going to raise their hand. So if you want these things, and we can all agree, and I don't know that any coach would raise their hand to any of those things, then what does practice look like? And where are the repetitions of these things? And are you teaching these behaviors? Again, this is not how to kick a ball or carry a ball or whatever you're teaching or dribble a ball. This is how am I giving them repetitions and teaching behaviors that they will develop over time that these things are not age dependent. These are desirable qualities at the highest level of sport, right? And 10 years from now, they'll still be desirable qualities at the highest level of sport, right? 10 years from now, we're not going to be like, nah, I don't want thinkers, right? Where, so these things outlive tactical changes and physical changes and everything like that. And that's why they're so important. And that's why, as coaches, when we start thinking of ourselves as people who teach proper behaviors and create the environment for those behaviors to be developed, that's coaching. And the younger the kids are, the more behavior intervention they need.
And this is going back to the special forces. Is, you speak to anyone that was in any type of special forces and they'll tell you nothing goes to plan. the
Yeah,
whole the whole practice, when you're training, you get it as close to battle as you can, but you're always throwing problems at people.
right.
And whether that's logistical problems, putting certain situations in, but what you're doing is you're building time so they can solution find live based on the capability that athletes around them. For them, it would be the soldiers around, so that they know each other's anticipation, they know what to say to each other as a solution. And when I hear that, I know what to do fast, quickly, without fear. The commitment process. Now, one of the areas I do find with some coaches, I know we're going back to that first point about, well, what's a great coach to you, because we need to establish that. But also a lot of it is the barrier. One of the barriers is trust of the athlete.
Mm,
Says, I don't trust our athlete in a match can do this, Mark. So that's where I need to tell them. And it's a
mhm,
bit like the chicken and the egg, because you're saying, well, how can you get to trust them? What are you doing in practicing in matches to build your trust in them, but also their confidence in their execution? And
mhm,
this is where I have the pressure loading phases of play. And I think I've changed the language since we first chatted all those years ago, John. But in
mhm,
essence, when you design a session plan, it's not just a what, it's the pressure load how. So I have a learn it, perform it, and challenge it. So on the session plan, you say, right, something we can't yet do. So we're in learn it, and there'll be a lot more interaction. The timeouts maybe, a minute or so, and it's, we can break it down. And we're still, improving the decision making, but it's about the understanding. Once we feel we're there, and it's athletes can say, hey, we're ready, or coach might think, right, I'm going to stretch you now. We go in perform it phase. So perform it phase is almost like game like. It's, you've got to go into the game. They're playing against a full speed opposition. You're looking for certain elements that we've done in the learn it phase. Has it now? I've made it more full game like. Is it still there, or is it regressing? So we can light and shade that. Where's the source? And all the hot one-to-ones are pulling athletes out, short timeouts, focus areas. But the important one is, which most teams are not doing, is what I call the challenge it phase. So the challenge it phase is right in full now in what looks like the match, the game. We're being successful at performance phase. Challenge it phase is now I'm going to find, can I break down my team? Can I put in situations, scenarios that's going to find weaknesses in my team? So my cap, I'm spinning now, and I'm saying I'm going to see if I can find the source of a breakdown and error.
mhm,
And there's so many ways you can do this, but what you're building there is, one is your confidence as a coach that actually, we can't break this down. But also the confidence of the athletes to know, even when you put pressure on me, if there's situations coming that could be umpire ref calls, or you're whispering to the opposition, right, do this now to this particular player, because that annoys them, or that's their weak point. How are we dealing with that? How are we coping? So when we start to get success in challenge it phase, now we're really preparing for the matches. But at any time, we can shift in and out. But instead of now saying, oh, we've got to practice and we do like a drill, then we do some game, what we're saying is, no, 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 there's more texture to this. And it
mhm.
may be that's very non-linear. So you may be in challenge it for the whole of a session. It may be
Mhm.
you're dipping in and out. It may be you start a session in challenge it phase. It's not
Mhm.
always we start with a warm up and a chat. I mean, one of the
Yeah.
things I know I shared with you before, John, was the what I call the covert recalls.
Yeah.
So what I say to a lot of the teams is, look, do the warm up, but make sure you're having your brief before the warm up. But then you do the warm up and you go straight into a match situation. And what you're
Yeah.
looking for is, without asking them questions or reminding them, you're looking for, now we're in game situation. I'm scanning for the elements we showed each other we could execute a week ago or the last session, whenever. Is it still there, or has it disappeared?
Right.
because that's giving me data if it's going on or not. Now I can put that in performance or challenge it. It's up to me to see where that stretch point is. As soon as I'm getting ticks,
Yeah.
I know the practices are being successful. If I'm
Right.
getting a lot of crosses, it's disappeared. Now I can start working through, and there's a process of questions I can work through to say, why has it disappeared?
Yeah.
Now I can spot that. I can put in interventions because we're not yet ready to move on because it's not yet embedded in my team.
Yeah, and I think that's to get into educational language, that's the difference between performance and learning. You can't see learning in this session. Learning is the ability to recall it, like
Yeah.
you said, in a week or two. And then what's important to understand as a coach is the less expertise that you have, the shorter the distance between those, recall sessions need to happen. Whereas with expert learners, you might wait 2 weeks and then throw it in there again and be like, okay, yeah, they do have this, or no, they didn't. Because, yeah, at the end of that practice, they're performing because you've queued up all the language and all the solutions and everything. But as soon as practice ends, they start forgetting. And that's learning. And learning is the process of forgetting and then recalling and making it permanent. And so those little things are, and those are hard to do because it challenges your ego as a coach when you
Yeah.
jump in and it's like, oh man, I thought we learned this, but we didn't.
Yeah. And that's again, if we become before a session say, right, what did we work on last week? And we chuck a bunch of questions, we're reminding them. So even if they show us, we don't have effective data then because we've got it into the front of the head. So I can't ask any questions. I need to just throw them into a game and I'm scanning for have they got the recall? Now, a situation's coming, are they now making those new choices? So this is that difference. And you're quite right, John, is if I'm a coach as the coach I need to be, I need to see how effective I have been as a coach. Not, yeah, we can hope it's there, but I want to know reality and I'm not going to
Mhm.
hide from reality. So then if it's not,
Well,
I can,
reality will show its face on Saturday in the
yeah,
match if you
exactly.
don't do
Yeah.
it in practice.
Let
So,
let's find the reality in our safe place, in a place where we can make our adaptations.
yeah,
But if it's not there, I can ask myself, did they understand the why?
yeah,
Or did I just chuck stuff at them? Were they all engaged? Are people specific that needed to know their role, or did I just get the same people giving me answers all the time? Was I shouting the answers all the time with them where they didn't have to think? Did I just go for all these little pockets of 5, 10 minutes? I saw it because it was short-term recall. I moved on, but I didn't really give it the time and the embedding. Was I not putting enough options of decision making in so they had to make decisions, or was I just doing more drills where, yeah, it looked good, but they weren't having to make decisions based on the adaptation. They were just doing what coach wanted. So I can ask all these questions of myself, but that will over time, and I'm talking a short period of time, that will show me the trends in me as a coach, what I need to change, but also it will show the trends of the team is this team, I need more of this and less of this because it's not being successful.
mhm.
And this is now you're working on, I'm learning my team now. But if it's continually now I'm checking that covert recall and it's across, that's your fault as a coach. It's not the athlete's fault.
Yeah,
But don't hide from it. Now you could do that during a session. You can just go, and now I'm getting an assistant coach. Can you just scan for this for me? And they're scanning, and you may be saying, right, we're working on attack now, and you've asked the assistant coach to scan for a defense recall
yeah,
or an injured player, whoever it might be. But all the time you're looking for that element that looked good at the time. Is it still there? And now I
yeah.
put stretch on it. And now I'm getting confidence in now I know I'm more likely to see it in a match. Because how many times have you heard, John, from even elite level coaches shaking a head and after a match saying, we did this 100 times in practice? You know,
Right,
and,
exactly.
and then we go into, well, how did you do it?
How did you do it, and did you check
Yeah,
that they knew it, and
yeah,
whatever, and what
yeah,
changed, and again, sometimes again, our default with an athlete is when they don't do something well, our default a lot is they just don't care. But that's not often it, right? It's that A, they don't know, B, they don't have the ability to execute it. C, they know, but they just made a mistake. They didn't read the situation. Or then maybe D, they don't care.
Yeah, and a lot of that, John, is are we building the judgment part of tactics enough in practice?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what you will do is you'll have a lot of teams and go, show me that play, and they'll show you, and it will look great.
Yeah.
But what they're not very good at is saying, okay, now the opposition's doing this. What do I need to adapt now to be
Hmm.
successful? And
Hmm.
that's that live judgment we're talking about based on our style of play and the permissions we give athletes.
Hmm.
So if we're not building that in practice and really loading that, what we're doing is we're building players that tactically in if it was a test and we said, right, show me this tactic, show me this tactic, show me this tactic, show me this technique, they score 100%. But
Hmm.
now you're putting them against an opposition, and now they have to adapt to make a judgment live. They'll be getting 0%.
Right.
And that's what, so we're back to begin with the end in mind. What am I preparing my team for? I'm not preparing them to be good at drills. I'm not
Hmm.
preparing them to be good at showing me this play. I'm preparing them as that combination that's on that pitch or court that needs to adjust based on injury, or am I now putting them in situations in that challenge it phase in practice where I now have confidence, they have confidence, they can make those adaptations.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, we've blown through an hour plus already, of course, as I knew we would. So let's bring it home here. First of all, how can people, I mean, so much to digest, and I always take notes and put my favorite parts that I want to clip out for social media and stuff, but so much great stuff here. How can people best get in touch with you?
So website is pdscoaching.com. That's Papa Delta Sierra coaching.com. All my tags are PDS Coach on social media. On that website, obviously, there's the live support and the teams, the individual coaches support, but also there's my online members resource now, which is literally you sign up, and there's shorter ones where you can just get stuck into how you can plan, do review, or the decision making, the rule of three we spoke about, or there's the full members area, and you've got over 150 hours of video clips of tutorials of me breaking this down, how to introduce it, how to develop yourself, how to review, what if these are happening. So if someone hasn't got the time or can't afford Mark Bennett to come in, there are now resources where you can just sign up, dip in and out to help enhance your coaching.
Hmm.
So that's the go-to get to, John.
Yeah, and I've been a member of that for many years, and it's a great site, lots of great resources. And I'll just say to people, like, this is hard. This is a big meal. This is an elephant, and you got to eat it bite by bite, right? But I think over time, when you layer something in, you become comfortable with that. You layer a little more in, you become comfortable, and your athletes become comfortable with it as well, right? All of a sudden it just becomes part of who you are. And I try to be very careful these days when I'm teaching other coaches or whatever to give you credit for what you learned because it's become such a part of how I do things that sometimes I forget where it came from. But I will give you, I want to give you that shout out that your influence on my own personal coaching for the last 8, 9 years that I coached was really massive on how I structured training to taught players to gave them ownership and stuff like that that I think gave the kids a much better experience than John O'Sullivan did before that. So thank you.
No, it's a pleasure, John. It's great to hear. I actually had somebody that I was watching practice that didn't know me, and I could see them using a rule of three, and it was just a grassroots team. And
Yeah.
I spoke to the coach. Says, "Oh, what are you using there?" And he says, "Oh, this rule of three." And he was sharing, explained it well. I didn't even tell him who I was. It was going, "That's fantastic what you're doing there. It's really good." But it was just lovely where people were picking up on stuff. But I'd say most of my work, John, is going back to that last point you were talking about of how tough it is to change. Is most of my live or online support with teams and coaches is supporting them to change.
Yeah.
It's that me being a bit relentless on, look, you said you're going to commit to this, let's review after practice with me, share me a voice note to get them to honor when things are tough. Says, no, I'm still going to go through this. It's kind of, you know what it's like. Same as an athlete, when you're as a coach learning a new skill, you're going to be chunky. It's like walking through the mud, but you've
Hmm.
got to walk through the mud to get out onto the other island you want to get on.
Yeah.
And often that's where people fall down is when you're walking through the mud. So a lot of my support with coaches, managers is I'll be there to help you. You're still going to do the walking, but I'm going to help guide you to make sure you get to the island that you said you need to get to.
Yeah. Well, I remember I put a GoPro on my chest and I filmed a practice and it was so bad that I didn't even want to send it to you. I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna send. You're like, no, you better send it. Like that one. And you were very kind and nice. And actually, when we reviewed it, it was probably better than I felt like it was in the moment,
Yeah.
or reviewed it and go, wow, that kid that maybe I was thinking didn't know this or blaming for this actually they were doing it right. I saw it wrong in the moment. And so, I always encourage coaches since then, like, "Oh, I want to change. Well, put a GoPro on your chest and actually, assess your own coaching. If you don't have someone to come out and assess it for you, assess it yourself. Um,
Yeah. And even then get someone, it might be in a different sport that you know, to go, look, I'm share this video with you with my notes. Can you have a look at it? And we'll catch up for a coffee,
yeah,
because it's giving you a bit of a measure of reality of, look, I think I coach like this, but that video is telling you, on this day, this is how you coach. And all of a sudden you're seeing, oh, they're walking away, I'm still talking, or that, I'm speaking the same 10% every single time. And
yeah,
it's kind of, whoa. And then you go, okay, now I get through, I hate the sound of my voice, is you're going, but now I've got something to work on.
yeah.
Great. And then people go, actually, I want to feel myself again. I want to see how I'm doing. But meeting
And
somebody, and often when it's in a different sport and you're just having a conversation with that video,
yeah,
they're not getting caught up in the technical tactical. They're getting caught up in the human element of
yeah,
interaction. Often that can be more useful than if you're a basketball coach getting another basketball coach. Get a softball coach, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's I have the same problems. Yeah, but I'm discussing your coaching, not the technical tactical element.
yeah. Amen to that. Mark, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back on the Way of Champions. I know our listeners are going to get a ton out of this. So, I love the work that you do and everything you are, and hopefully our paths cross in person here sometime soon.
I've got my last question for you, John.
Oh boy.
Remember, I do these. Is from this conversation, what has been your main takeaway or that recall for you? What has been the one or two
You know,
resonate?
as we were talking, right? Because you and I probably haven't spoken in a number of years.
Mm.
And so number one, just sort of as we're talking, remembering the different things, I'm like, oh yeah, that was from Mark as well, right? Number two, sort of for a new thing, as you talked about the three A's, which you hadn't, I don't think, had put that language to it with communication of accept it, acknowledge it, and act on it, and all that. I think that was kind of a new thing for me. And maybe you did, and I just didn't pay attention last time, but
Well, there's so much. I'm always evolving. There's a problem, there's a bit of grey. Well, let's come up with a solution that is quite robust. So I'm always doing that. So it may not have been there, John. I don't know what it may have been, 6, 7 years. Yeah,
it's
time
been a
flies.
long time. So, awesome. Well, listen, thank you, my friend. Thanks for being on the Way of Champions, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, John. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thank you again, Mark Bennett, pdscoaching.com or at PDS Coach on social media. Um, I think if you listen to that whole conversation, you see why I love Mark Bennett and his work so much, why it was and is so influential on my own coaching, and why I hope you took as many notes there as I did, because there's so many just nuggets there. And like I said at the end, it can be overwhelming. But if you take some of the pieces and you join his membership site or just take good notes from this podcast and layer in something like asking your players, teaching them the rule of three or asking them to define what is acceptable and unacceptable and exceptional, teaching them about communication, just one thing at a time and work on that, right? And recognize that, again, our job is we're teaching behaviors and that performance is behaviors and the right behaviors repeated often enough over time yield excellent athletes, yield excellent people. And I hope you got that out of the podcast today. Okay. Thanks to Sprocket Sports. Thanks to our Patreon podcast champions. Thanks for all of you who reach out, send your kudos, send the emails. And again, final thing, if you're interested in speakers, if you're interested in bulk book orders, just email me, John, John, changethegameproject.com. We'll get that set up for you. But in the meantime, right, your influence is never neutral. And if you take some of the stuff you learned today, your influence will be even greater and more impactful on not only your athletes, but all the people in your life. So go out and use it for good. We'll see you again next week, everybody.